Okay, are we streaming? How do I test if I'm streaming? I have no idea. Okay, apparently I'm streaming. I'll come back to another study session. And let's go through some Comptia revision. Let's double check that I'm actually live. Okay, looks like I'm live. See if you can hear myself talk. Let us see. Am I talking? Okay, the stream has just paused. What's going on? No, it's not. There's a slight delay. Okay, looks like I'm live. See if you can hear myself talk. Sweet, let's go. Set a Pomodoro timer. And let's revise. Be a good boy. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Professor Messer's Comptia A Plus 220-1201 and 220-1202 training course. This training course is designed to teach you everything you need to know to pass both of these exams and earn your A Plus certification. If you're working towards your A Plus certification, then you're probably already familiar that Comptia is one of the largest organizations in the world for IT certifications. They provide entry-level certifications, certifications for networking, security, data analysis, AI, and so much more. If you're just getting into the world of information technology, then you've probably seen the A Plus certification mentioned. The A Plus certification is commonly mentioned when you're at the starting point of technology career. And as you've probably already found, the A Plus is often course to teach you about hardware, networking, security, and operating systems. It's a great way to extend your knowledge in technology and learn a lot more about what's happening. The laptop has become the standard computing platform for almost anyone who's mobile, and that's mostly because you're able to fit so much technology into such a small place. But there is a trade-off when it comes to troubleshooting or dealing with these very small components inside of a laptop computer. It is built to very precise specifications, and therefore it requires a very precise form of troubleshooting. You'll find that certain laptops are much easier to work on than others. Some have been engineered so that you can get inside of the system and replace memory or storage devices. Other laptops are built so that it's very difficult to gain access to the inside of that device, and even more difficult to be able to swap out some of those components. For that reason, you'll find that different laptop manufacturers will have very different processes for managing and troubleshooting their particular systems. A good example of this is how different laptop manufacturers might handle batteries. With some laptops, the batteries are very modular and can be removed from the laptop and replaced with a different battery very, very easily. Other laptops have the battery built into the system and it's not designed to be swapped out by the user. This may make it very difficult if you have to swap out a battery that's in a system that is not designed for a modular battery replacement. You'll generally find two
Bruh, why is it so slow? Why
different
are you
types
so
of batteries being used in our laptops. One is a lithium ion and the other is a lithium ion polymer. Both of these are designed so that they don't have the traditional memory effect that we had with older battery technologies. This means you can recharge the battery at any time and not worry that you're affecting the overall capacity of that particular battery. You'll also find that different manufacturers use different types of battery form factors. This means that if you need a battery for your laptop, you need to make sure that you're getting exactly the right battery for that specific laptop model. You'll find that if you grab a laptop battery from a different make and model, that it's not going to fit into the battery slot of your laptop. With modular batteries, it's very easy for the end user to be able to remove and replace the batteries inside of that laptop. Usually they have a button that you can press that will pop out one battery, and then you can slide another battery directly into that same slot. If the battery is built into the laptop itself, this type of modularity is not available, and usually you would have to have a technician completely take apart the laptop just to replace the battery. If you've maintained a group of laptops, then you know one of the most used components on that laptop is the keyboard. This commonly means that the keyboard is probably going to be swapped out more than any other component on that particular device. Fortunately, most laptop manufacturers make this process relatively easy. You can usually remove a bezel on the laptop or a few screws, and the laptop keyboard will pop out as a single unit. It very often is connected to the system board of the laptop using a ribbon cable. There's usually a connector on the end that allows you to easily disconnect and then reconnect a new keyboard. If you do have a user that is having problems with their laptop keyboard, or you'd like to perform some diagnostics of that keyboard, you could plug in an external USB keyboard to see what the results might be. This might allow you to work around problems that may exist in the laptop's primary keyboard, and it can also help you troubleshoot whether the problem is with the hardware of the keyboard itself or with the operating system inside of the laptop. Laptop keyboards are designed to be compact so that you can fit everything that would be on a regular sized keyboard inside of a very small space. Often there will be special keys available, such as a Windows keys or a function key that can be used simultaneously with other keys on the laptop to perform secondary functions. And if the laptop is wide enough, you may find there's enough room to have a numeric keypad built into the laptop itself, extending the functionality of this portable platform. You may find that the problem you're having is not with the entire keyboard, but only with one key or keycap on the keyboard. This means that you may need to replace a single key on that keyboard. On desktop systems, these keys are relatively robust. You can work with them to remove a keycap and replace the keycap relatively easily. But on a laptop, these keys are often very fragile, and you have to take special care to make sure that you don't damage the keys as you are replacing them. Make sure you follow the instructions from the manufacturer so that you don't damage anything that may be underneath that keycap. There are different components that are used across different laptop keyboards, and as you can see, it's a very delicate device that can be very easily damaged. So make sure you follow those instructions. You'll have no problem replacing that keyboard component. Because laptops obviously have a relatively smaller form factor than something we would use on a desktop, that means that we also have the internal components with a smaller form
Oh, that's interesting.
factor.
Laptop
An example of
memory.
this would be the memory that we use inside of our laptop, which is a smaller form factor than what you would find on a traditional desktop motherboard. We refer to
Small outline dual inline memory module.
this dual
Streaming
inline memory
seems to
module in a
really
laptop
tug on
as a
maintenance.
small outline dual inline memory module, or SODIMM. On laptops that use these SODIMM modules, it's very easy to remove the module and replace it with a new one. But not all laptops provide this level of modularity. You may find that the memory in your laptop is soldered to the motherboard and is not in this modular form. That means that you would have to replace the entire system board if you need to upgrade the memory of that system.
Showtime! Chef! It's hard. And it's brutal, and that's what makes it special.
I don't want you to hide from things.
To add or replace memory inside of one of these systems, there's usually a place where you can open up a window into the back of the laptop, remove any memory that might be there, or add additional memory of that system. To add or replace memory inside of one of these systems, there's usually a place where you can open up a window into the back of the laptop, remove any memory that might be there, or add additional memory into the slots that are available. Once you push down on that particular module, it locks in place with clips that are on the motherboard, and that memory is now upgraded inside of that laptop. Just as our desktop computers have a place where we can store operating system files and user documents, we have the same requirement for our laptop computers. Many of our older laptops will use a traditional hard drive or spin.
So we're starting off with the basics. We're
Spinning
seeing
drive that has platters to be able to store that information. On desktop computers, you may have seen 3.5-inch drives being used for storage, and on
Some
laptops,
stuff I haven't. Didn't know about the SODIMM, which I can't remember the acronym for. Small outline.
because they are a smaller form factor, you'll find a smaller storage device, and that is a 2.5-inch hard
Wow, that's a mouthful. That is a mouthful. Okay.
drive. But these days, we have rapidly moved away from a spinning drive inside of a laptop computer to a much faster and much more reliable SSD, or solid-state drive. A solid-state drive is simply memory, and it has no moving parts at all. This allows us to have very fast access to this memory, and also provides additional reliability because we don't have to worry about that spinning drive failing on a laptop device. On older laptops,
It's pretty interesting how we went from a
you may see the SSD in that same 2.5-inch form factor, but newer laptops tend to have an M.2 interface, which provides a much smaller form factor on the system board. This also makes it a much easier installation because we simply need to plug in that M.2 interface to be able to have access to the data and to power up the drive itself. With the older 2.5-inch form factor, there were two separate connections, one for data and one for power. Here's a good example of both of these storage drive types. The 2.5-inch form factor is on the left, and the M.2 interface is on the right. You can see that you have a much smaller form factor for the M.2 over the 2.5-inch, which makes it very attractive for laptops and other mobile devices. On some laptops, replacing the 2.5-inch storage drive or an M.2 drive can be relatively easy. There may be a cover on the back of the laptop that you can remove. You take out a couple of screws on the drive, and you're able to remove that drive very easily. Installing an M.2 drive is often easier because there is a single screw where you can install and fasten down that particular M.2 drive. Here's how easy it is to install an M.2 interface. You simply slide in the M.2 interface card. It goes into a specific slot that is on the M.2 interface itself. You push it in so that it's able to get a good connection with none of this copper showing once you have it connected, and then you can push it down and screw it into the system board so that it will stay in place.
With Virgin Media, get smooth, lightning-fast M125 broadband for under £26 a month and no setup fee.
Installing or replacing a 2.5-inch form factor drive is relatively easy. There are usually a couple of screws that you can remove. This technician is using a special pad that allows them to save those very tiny screws into this little area. And then once they have that, they can simply pull it out of the interface, and now your drive is free. To add another drive back, you simply reverse the process. And once you're done installing either the 2.5-inch drive or the M.2 drive, you can replace the cover on the top, and your installation is done. Many users with older laptops may want to replace the spinning hard drive that's inside of that laptop with a solid-state drive. Not only is this a more reliable form of storage, it also is a much faster form of storage. It's almost like upgrading and getting a brand new laptop just by replacing a single component. You can certainly install a brand new operating system on the SSD and then manually transfer all of the user's documents from one device to the other and then install any of the applications that they need to use. This is obviously much more time consuming than backing up everything that's on the original drive and copying it over to the new SSD. To be able to do that easily, we may want to use specialized software. This is usually referred to as imaging software or cloning software because we are creating an exact duplicate of the data from one storage drive to the new one. Many SSD manufacturers recognize this is a very common task, and they will include imaging software with the SSD itself. You can also use third-party software, like the one you see here, to be able to copy every
Let's see if this improves things.
everything from one drive or one partition into a new drive or a new partition. Sometimes this requires you to create an entire image of the system, and you store that image on a separate storage device. Then you would install your new drive and then copy everything from that image back to the new drive. To do this even faster, you may be able to install both the old drive and the new drive at the same time and use that same imaging software to simply image from one device to the other in real time. Many laptops today don't even have a separate wired network connection on the laptop itself. To be able to have any connectivity to the rest of the world, that laptop uses some type of wireless connection, such as 802.11 or Bluetooth. The wireless components that provide you with this connectivity are usually on the motherboard itself, but older laptops may have separate interface cards that provide this wireless connectivity. For example, you may be using 802.11 for your local area network wireless connections inside of a building, and there may be a mini PCI or mini PCI Express card that provides that 802.11 functionality. You can see that these cards are designed to be modular, so you can install and uninstall them from the laptop system board. These cards often have small connectors on them that you plug in the wireless antennas that are already built into your laptop. Bluetooth is often used as a short-range network communication, and you often see it referred to as a PAN or a personal that are already built into your laptop. You can see that these cards are designed to be modular, so you can install and uninstall them from the laptop system board. These cards often have small connectors on them that you plug in the wireless antennas that are already built into your laptop. Bluetooth is often used as a short-range network communication, and you often see it referred to as a PAN or a personal area network. Bluetooth allows you to connect an external mouse, an external keyboard, or any other type of peripheral. Often they are provided with separate interface cards, but most newer laptops also have this Bluetooth functionality built into the laptop system board itself. Installing these modular cards is very similar to the process of installing additional memory modules onto the system board. There's very often a panel that you can remove on the back of the laptop, and there'll be a place where you can install that particular component. Once you place the card in the laptop, it usually locks down into the laptop with connectors that are built into the interface. And in this particular case, it's an 802.11 card, so you'll need to also connect the wireless antenna wires. You can see them down here with the gray and the black wire, and they will connect to the smaller connectors on the interface card itself. Many of these 802.11 interfaces, whether they are on the system board itself or an external card, will usually have two separate connectors. One of them is a main connector, and the other is an auxiliary connector. You might also find a third antenna being used for all of your Bluetooth connections.
Oh my god, the ads are insane.
These antenna wires commonly wrap around the outside of the display itself. This allows you to get those antenna wires as high as possible when you open up the screen of your laptop. And if you've ever replaced a
So you
laptop
have
screen, you'll
Wi-Fi
notice
and
that the
Bluetooth
antenna wires are
embedded
coming
into
right out of the bottom of that
laptops,
screen
obviously.
so that you can then connect them to the
Bluetooth for
existing
short
antenna
range
connectors on your system board.
communications
If you were to
and
follow those
data
wires, you'd see
transmission.
that they would probably go behind your keyboard to the
Wireless
system board
for
itself, where
high-speed
they are
internet
connecting to
access.
the 802.11.
I didn't know that
Bluetooth
the computers
antenna
have
connectors.
the antenna built into
Many of our
them.
modern operating systems support authentication to our laptop using methods other
Makes
than
sense.
password. For example, you may have the option to use biometrics to be able to unlock or gain access to your laptop computer. These biometrics allow you to use a fingerprint or face recognition, which means that this laptop will only be available if you've configured your face or your fingerprint for that laptop operating system. This means that you'll need an operating system that is able to use these biometric features, and you'll need the biometric hardware to be able to take advantage of that function. This means that you may need a fingerprint reader on the laptop itself, or you may need a webcam or camera built into the laptop that's able to do face recognition. This type of biometric authentication has become relatively secure in recent years, and you'll often find that using a Face ID or some other type of fingerprint reader is a very secure way to lock down your There's Windows Hello Face, which you have one of those fingerprint readers built into the hardware, paid for something at a point of sale terminal using your phone or your smartwatch, then you are using a network type known as NFC, or near field communication. NFC is a very short range networking function, so usually you have to be relatively close, often 4 centimeters or less, just to be able to use that function. And of course, we can use NFC for more than just purchases at a point of sale terminal.
So this
We can
is
use
the
this on a
technology
hospital
used for
workstation so that
payments
any nurse that walks up to the workstation
and
is able to
mobile phone
authenticate
payments,
using their
contactless
access
payments.
card or their NFC device. This is also used for warehouses, manufacturing, shipping and receiving, and anywhere that you may need to easily authenticate wirelessly. If you have a laptop and you've used it to be in a meeting, then you've probably taken advantage of the camera that is often built into the laptop itself. It's usually right in the center at the very top of the screen. This not only allows you to capture video to a file, but you can also use it for real-time video on things like a video conference call. On most laptops, not only will you have the camera right in the middle, but often there is a microphone to the left and right so that you're able to not only show the video, but people are able to hear exactly what you're saying. These built-in cameras are certainly convenient and allow you to use this functionality without carrying around any other equipment. But if you find you need additional functionality or a higher definition camera, you may want to use an external camera and attach it to the top of your laptop display.
Okay, pretty basic. So in lesson summary, he goes over the main components of what's in a laptop, what's in hardware, how the batteries work at a basic level, how the different hardware comes together to actually give you some functionality. Pretty interesting. Some acronyms I didn't know, well, some I was aware of. Well, let's carry on.
With every person you know and everyone in your organization walking around with a phone, a tablet, or even both of those, we need to have different ways to be able to connect these devices back to the computers and networks that we normally use. And of course, it seems that each device has a different way of connecting and communicating back to your computer. In this video, we'll look at wired connectivity, wireless connectivity, and all of the different standards and options that you might have available on today's mobile devices. You'll find that these connections that we use for these mobile devices are used for more than simply charging the battery. We often might use them for connectivity and synchronization of the data on these devices. You might want to back up what's on that device, or use it as a way to identify that the device is really yours. One of the most common ways to connect these mobile devices is using USB, or the Universal Serial Bus. These are standard connections that we've used
I
for
always
years
forget, I always forget that acronym. Universal Serial Bus. Quiz, what does USB stand for?
years, and of course the connectors themselves have changed a bit as time has gone on.
Alright, micro B, mini B. Oh my god, okay.
You'll find that there are different types of connections for USB. For older devices, you may find the mini and micro USB plugs are very popular. These were certainly used on older mobile devices, but you may find even devices in use today are still using these very specific USB types. You may find, of course, that our mobile devices are getting smaller
Thank
and
God for
smaller, but
USB-C
these
everywhere
interfaces
now.
are made for a much larger style of interface. And although many of our modern devices have migrated away from the micro B plug or the mini B plug, you may still use the USB Type A connection to plug into your computing device like your desktop computer or your laptop computer. More modern devices are still using the Universal Serial Bus, but they're using a newer version referred to as USB-C. This describes this physical connection of a USB-C plug. Inside of this connection are 24 pins, and they have the same style of connection regardless of how you might plug it in. This can easily replace the older USB 2.0 connection all the way up to the latest standard of USB, and we can even put different types of signals on this wire, even though they're all using the same type of connector as its physical interface. For example, you might find that this USB connection is used for more than just serial connectivity. You can see DisplayPort, HDMI, and Thunderbolt all can use that single connector to be able to transmit video, data, and other information. USB-C was designed to be a connector that's easy to use because you can plug it in any orientation, and it also supports a higher speed than the older USB-style connectors that we
Yeah,
used
like
to
you
use.
can't stream video just off
If you're using
USB.
an older
You'd
mobile
have to
device
use
used by Apple,
USB-C.
you may not be using a USB
HDMI,
connection. You may instead
or
be
another
using a
visual
proprietary
output.
connection from Apple known as a Lightning connector. This Lightning connector has 8 pins, and it's commonly used for older iPhone and iPad devices. Lightning was introduced to resolve a number of problems with the older USB connection standard. For example, it supported a higher power output, so it could charge your phones and your tablets a little bit faster. It can be inserted either way, so you don't have to keep moving the connector back and forth and up and down to try to find the right connection. And this relatively simple design made it easy to be able to use this across many different devices. The challenge, of course, is that you might be using or supporting a number of different mobile devices from a number of different manufacturers. So you may be walking around with a lot of different connector types and cables inside of your bag just to be able to support all of these different components. This might change going forward as we move towards a single USB-C connector type instead of using these many and very different connections. If you want to communicate wirelessly, there are also a number of options available on your mobile device. One of those options is NFC, or Near Field Communication. NFC is commonly used to transmit a little bit of data over a very short connection. NFC is often built into your phone, your tablet, and your smartwatch, and it's often used as payment systems for paying something at a point of sale terminal, or you might use it as identification to be able to gain access through a particular door, or to be able to transfer information from one phone to another. Some organizations might have a sensor on the wall, and they use NFC in a watch or phone to be able to act as an access control. So instead of walking around with an ID card or separate access card, you can simply use the phone that you're carrying anyway. If you're using wireless headsets or wireless keyboards and mice, then you're probably using Bluetooth. Bluetooth allows us to connect devices over a high-speed network at relatively short distances. Often we refer to this as a personal area network, or a PAN. This is commonly used for devices that we would personally use on that mobile device. Things like tethering your smartphone to be able to connect wirelessly, or using it to connect wireless headphones or headsets. All of these types of Bluetooth communications are designed for the individual, although it is possible to connect multiple phones and devices together using this Bluetooth networking technology. Another useful mobile connection type is to use your mobile phone as an internet router. If we have many people connecting to our mobile phone for internet access, we refer to that as a hotspot. If we simply have one device that is connecting to this mobile phone, and that is the only device that's able to use that phone, we often refer to that as tethering. This is functionality that's commonly associated with the software in your phone and the capabilities from your phone provider. So you may want to contact your mobile provider for your telephone and find out if a hotspot functionality is something that you can use on your mobile device.
We are on 1.2. Again, deeper coverage of like mobile devices and the hardware components within them and the tools that let you connect wirelessly and transmit data.
Smart automations, patching, software deployment, scripting. And the amazing thing is that it does all this while still being easy to use. It's magical.
Just this clean, intuitive UI where everything is where it's supposed to be.
Many of us have used our fingers to be able to manipulate the screen of our mobile phones or our tablets. But if you need a more precise input method, you might want to use a stylus. This digital stylus is like using a pencil or a pen, and you're able to get very granular and fine control of that information on the screen. The stylus is useful with the device, your most number of features for the person using that headset. This headset.
Sorry,
allows
I'm
you
skipping
here
ahead.
and
I know what a
as a common
stylus
headset
is and
type,
what a
or you may use the
USB
older
is.
analog connection over a TRRS connector. This is a tip ring sleeve connector. It's commonly a 3.5mm style connector. You might also hear this referred to as an analog audio jack. If you're using an older model of an Apple iPhone, instead of using USB, you may need to use Lightning, and there are headsets, and most of those headsets on the tip of that connector, and the sleeve is the connector closest to the back sleeve of the connector. And with the TRRS, there are two connectors in the middle, and these are both the ring connectors. Wireless headsets, of course, do not need any type of wires, so you might have something very simple that is battery powered and connected to your mobile device over Bluetooth. If you use that wireless headset all day, you may find that you run out of battery, and you might have to shift over to the wired version of that headset. If you like to listen to music on your mobile phone, you may find that the speakers on the phone don't provide much fidelity. If that's the case for you, you might want to use wireless speakers, which provide a better sound over this battery-powered and portable speaker system. These are usually connected to your mobile device wirelessly using Bluetooth, which allows you to take the sound and move it anywhere you would like within the range of that mobile phone. Many of our phones and tablets already include a camera or webcam built in a desktop or laptop to use it in the applications. So this might be unplugging all of the wires every day to be able to take the laptop office, and you like to take your laptop capturing audio and video, or you might use it with an application to provide video and audio conferencing. If you work in an office and you like to take your laptop home at night, you may find yourself unplugging all of the wires every day to be able to take the laptop home, and then when you come back to the office, you have to plug all of those wires back in again. These would be wires for your video connection.
You know, actually,
mouse, your
I need
keyboard,
a
perhaps
docking
your network
station
link,
for my
and anything
own
else that needs to be physically
home
connected.
setup.
There are easier ways to perform that function using a docking station. Docking stations are a quick way to connect and disconnect the laptop without having to touch any of the cables that might be on that desk. They also often provide additional interface options, and you might even be able to plug in full-size interface cards into the docking station. Here's a docking station that's in our office. You can see that we have a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse, probably have a network connection on the back of this docking station, and we can simply bring our laptop in, place it on top of the docking station, and immediately start working. At the end of the day, when we're ready to leave, we simply disconnect it from the docking station and leave all of the wires in place. If you don't need support for additional adapter cards and you want something that's a bit more portable, you might want to use a port replicator. These are very similar to a docking station, but instead of getting a very specific docking station for a specific laptop, these port replicators are commonly connecting over a USB connection, making it something that you can use on almost any laptop or desktop computer. These are also relatively portable because you don't have to worry about them being very large and supporting those adapter cards. This port replicator includes a lot of different connectors, including USB connections and audio. This one also supports micro SD and SD card reader built into the port replicator itself. And on the other side, we have additional USB and video output options as well. If you're using a laptop in a additional USB and video output options and audio, this one options are built into today's kernel mouse that takes up a traditional mouse. A trackpad can provide you with other many laptops will allow you.
So it's going over
And that will
different
enable
hardware
or disable
components,
the use of that
trackpads,
trackpad. That way you can continue to use
mouses,
it on your tablet, and you
peripherals.
might want to use that same technology on your laptop or desktop computer. And you can do that by using a drawing pad. This is an external digitizer or USB connection and or your desktop computer. USB.
Oh. Enjoy listening to the ads, people.
Okay, if there's one AI site builder you need to meet, this is Dope Tech from Wix. Now this whole flow is a conversation, so your words actually build your website. I'm going for a store, and after a free
If you have an organization and you need to manage all of the mobile phones used in the organization, then you need a mobile device manager, or MDM. This allows you to manage devices that may be owned by your company or devices that are personally owned. This would be a BYOD, where someone is bringing their own device to use at work. When that occurs, you need some way to be able to centrally manage all of your mobile devices from one place. This is a relatively specialized function, and so you need specialized software to be able to do this. An MDM allows you as the system administrator to set certain rules and parameters on how these mobile devices are used. So you can set policies on which applications are allowed or not allowed. You can configure or disable functionality of things like your camera or GPS, and effectively control almost every aspect of these mobile devices. This also allows you as a company to set up a partitioned area on someone's personal phone for use by the organization. This allows your users to have their own private data that is protected and private to them, and have a different part of the phone that is partitioned off just for corporate data. And from a security perspective, you can require the use of certain security policies. For example, you may require everyone in your organization to use screen locks, and those screen locks need to have a personal identification number or other type of access in order to unlock that phone. BYOD is an interesting challenge for organizations. This, of course, stands for Bring Your Own Device. You may see this also referred to as Bring Your Own Technology. The employee owns the phone, and since they already have a phone, this simplifies things for the employee so that they don't have to carry around two different mobile devices. But we need to have some way to protect the company data that is stored in that phone and to make sure that all the user's personal information remains personal and private. This allows you to configure from the mobile device manager what part of that device is home or private and what part of that device is used for work purposes. You can also set different parameters for how the data is protected on that device, and you also need to set policies on what happens to the data on that device if the phone is upgraded, traded in, or if the phone is lost. Some organizations don't allow user phones to be used inside of the company. Instead, the company will provide the phones through COPE. This is corporate owned, personally enabled. The company purchases the phone, they assign that phone to a user, and then they manage that as a corporate device. Although the corporation does have full control of that device, in many organizations, they allow the user to use it as a personal device as well. Since the company has purchased the phone, they have complete control over the phone, and they manage every aspect of how that particular device is managed. This is very similar to how organizations might manage laptops, desktops, and other computing devices. The company determines how information is stored on the device, what type of information is stored on the device, or perhaps more importantly, what happens to that data if the device is changed out or if the device is lost. Some organizations will add some flexibility to the process and allow the user to choose from a selection of devices. We refer to that as CYOD, or Choose Your Own Device. Having management of all of your mobile devices from a central MDM policy screen provides a lot of flexibility and saves a lot of time. For example, you can configure your corporate email settings on the mobile device manager. That's pushed down to everyone's phone, and so they don't have to make any changes at all to gain access to their inbox. They simply turn on their phone, and everything works as it should. The security team may decide that they would like additional security on these mobile devices since they are outside of the company and can be lost easily, so they may require things like two-factor authentication, and they can specify what type of multi-factor authentication they would like. And from the MDM, you can determine what applications are allowed on that device, if there are certain applications that are forbidden to be installed on that device, and you can even push those applications to be installed automatically. Here's a view from an MDM console. We can see that we are looking at a number of devices inside of the organization. We can see the device name, the platform that it uses. We can see usernames associated with that phone, and even know the email and contact information for the phone. And if you need the IMEI, which is a unique identifier, that's also listed in the mobile device manager. You can drill down on one of those devices to get more information about it. For example, this is an Apple iOS device, specifically an iPhone 13. You can see the version of iOS that's being used. We also have
So it
information
makes
about the
sense
operating
across a
system
large
running on that
company
device, different
organization
device
if
security
they
options that may be
provide
enabled or
tools like
disabled,
phones or
and you can see the network
laptops.
summary that's currently
An
in use for that
MDM,
particular
mobile
unit.
device
If we
management
click over on the
software tool,
restrictions
is
tab,
how
you
you'd
can see
actually
all of
track
the
them.
settings that you can enable or
Which, from a
disable since you
cybersecurity
are the
perspective,
manager
means
of
you
this
have an
particular
idea
phone.
of
You can
what's
enable or
going on with
disable
all
the
your
camera,
endpoints.
FaceTime. You can change if voice dialing is enabled or disabled. If you want to get rid of Siri, you can turn that off inside of the MDM. And different security options, printing options, and application options are also configured from this restrictions screen. The MDM also allows you to configure how this device will be synchronized over the air. Since these devices are rarely plugged into a central facility, we need some way to back up the data that's being stored on these mobile phones. Some of these settings are already pre-configured. For example, your telephone information and messages is something that we know will always be configured and set up on these devices. But different organizations might use different types of email. One organization might use Gmail, another organization might use Microsoft Outlook. Each organization does things a different way with different settings, and so the MDM allows you to have all of those configured in one central place. It also allows you to turn on how the data will be synchronized. You can specify whether data will be synchronized over the Wi-Fi network only, or if it will use the cellular network as well.
Hello.
This is also important for understanding how this data will also be
Finally,
restored
study
if this
with
device
me.
fails, is damaged, or you need to replace it. You can
Doing
also get into the granular
cybersecurity.
settings of
Oh,
the
yeah.
synchronization. For example, you can specify what specific types of data will be synchronized. Will we synchronize calendar settings? Will we synchronize contact details? And we may want to even change how the data is going to be synchronized at different times of the day. For example, some organizations may not want to use the cellular network due to cost limitations.
Unfair
Maybe
Rabbit,
you
are
can
you
only
also
synchronize
studying?
this data if it's on an 802.11 or local network. Fortunately, most of our mobile devices have settings where we can specify how much of the cellular network can be used and for what purposes. You want to check with the
Data
contract that you
caps,
have with your cellular provider to see how much data would be allowed over this network and at what particular time. And you as the administrator could configure, for example, if automatic downloads are configured, and if they are configured, what size applications can be downloaded over the mobile network. When you're setting up business applications on these devices, you're often configuring things like Outlook, email, cloud storage, and other services. You would commonly set those up in the account setting of that device, where you would need to provide a username, a password, or some other type of authentication factor. From there, you can get even more granular control over exactly what will be synchronized, and you can choose mail, contacts, calendars, reminders, notes, or other settings.
Good luck with
you
the
can also set this
OSCP.
up to be different from other services.
I don't know how
So
on
the
earth you
synchronization
came
settings
across
for
this.
Microsoft Exchange might be very different than the synchronizations
This
that
live
you configure
stream.
for Google Mail.
But thanks for commenting.
Set this up to be different from other services.
What are
So
you
your
doing on a
synchronization settings for
Comptia
Microsoft
A+
Exchange
video
might be
if
very
you're studying for
different
your
than the synchronizations
OSCP?
that you configure for Google Mail.
The Queen stole everything from all of us.
You must be all over the HDB boxes.
You have to run.
Radio, we on section 2. Yay.
This video is Introduction to IP, and although it does not have a direct correlation back to the exam objectives, everything that's in Domain 2, or the networking domain, tends to build on the information that we provide in this video. If you're unfamiliar with some of the details of networking, and especially of IP, I highly recommend you watch this video as a primer for the videos that are to follow. Our networks are designed to move information from one device to another device, and there is a lot of information that goes across our modern networks. We usually refer to these networks as Ethernet networks, wireless networks, DSL networks, and other types. And from IP's perspective, it really doesn't matter what method you're using for the transportation. The important part is what's inside of those packets that we are sending across the network. In this video, we'll talk about the network as a series of highways or roads, which means that IP, or the Internet Protocol, is going to be the truck that is driving across that road. We're going to put information into that truck, send that IP truck across the network, and we're going to unpack that truck on the other side. If we were to look at
It'd be good to have an infographic for what he's explaining. He's explaining Internet Protocol. How information moves.
Inside the truck, we would see a lot of information. There is a box inside of the truck, and we refer to that box as holding TCP or UDP information. We'll learn more.
That's transmission control protocol and user datagram protocol, I think. My memory's rusty. I did some reading a while
Or
ago.
about TCP and UDP later on in this video. And of course, just like boxes that you might use to move, inside of these TCP or UDP boxes is information that is important for us to get from one place to another. You can see that we start to nest information within another. In the world of networking, we refer to this as encapsulation and decapsulation. Here's a basic diagram of us sending information to a web server. On one side is our client or laptop computer, and on the other side is the web server itself. In this particular example, we're sending this information across an Ethernet network, and all of the information that's being sent across the network is the Ethernet payload. Also included with this Ethernet payload is information at the beginning of this payload that is a header, and information at the end that's a trailer. This allows us to know exactly where the data starts and where the data.
That's a lot of info. Okay. I am gonna backtrack. Thank you, Unfair Rabbit. You are officially my first person to comment on the stream, so I will remember your name.
Also included
All the
with this
best on your
Ethernet payload is
OCP.
information at the beginning of this payload that is a header, and information at the end that's a trailer. This allows us to know exactly where the data starts and where the data ends. Of course, there's more information within this Ethernet payload, and if we were to look a little bit closer at that payload, we would see that there's a specific kind of data contained within that payload. In this particular example, we're carrying IP traffic, so there's an IP payload and an IP header within that same Ethernet frame. And as you probably already expected, within this IP payload, we have even more detail that consists of a TCP payload in this particular example, and that TCP payload also consists of a TCP header. And we can continue to break it. Within this IP payload, we have even more detail. There's a specific kind of data contained within that payload. In this particular example, we're carrying IP traffic, so there's an IP payload and an IP header within kind of data contained within that payload. In this particular example, we're carrying IP traffic, so there's an IP payload and an IP header within that same Ethernet. And within this Ethernet payload, and if we were to look a little bit closer at that payload, we would see that there's a specific kind of data contained within that payload. In this particular example, we're carrying IP traffic, so there's an IP payload and an IP header within that same Ethernet frame. And as you probably already expected, within this IP payload, we have even more detail that consists of a TCP payload in this particular example, and that TCP payload also consists of a TCP header. And we can continue to break this down since we know that this is web traffic. We know that within that TCP payload is HTTP, or Hypertext Transfer Protocol data, which holds all of that web server communication. So as you can see, this Ethernet frame has within it IP traffic, TCP information, and HTTP information. And different protocols may have even more layers of information that we could drill into to see exactly what's being sent between these two devices. The Internet Protocol, or IP, is one of the most popular.
So this is breaking down the different layers of information that you'd see transmitting between a client and a server. So in a web request, we're seeing Internet Protocol, IP payload, and then if you drill further down into that, it's a transmission control protocol payload. Drill even further to that, and you see HTTP data, which is basically very common on like your web applications and accessible, I think, if you go through cookies or you review cookies. Again, I'm not a professional, just done a bit of light reading. So yeah, and I know like when you're intercepting traffic and things like that, or you're testing web apps, this is important because you're looking at session headers and things of that nature. So interesting.
And HTTP information. And different protocols may have even more layers of information that we could drill into to see exactly what's being sent between these two devices. The Internet Protocol, or IP, is one of the most popular protocols that you'll find. But you'll also notice that within that IP, we commonly find TCP and UDP. TCP and UDP are very similar protocols that are used to transport information. But there are some interesting characteristics that are unique to each, and in this video, we'll look at what some of those unique characteristics might be. If you're talking to a network professional or someone taking their Network Plus certification, they'll often refer to TCP or UDP as an OSI Layer 4 protocol. For the purposes of the A+, the OSI model is not important for us to know, but you will see that particular term show up when you're reading through different books or referencing different materials.
With Virgin Media, get smooth, lightning fast.
Yeah, again, I've done some reading on this in the past, so I know that there's a breakdown of in networking. I think there's like 7 different stages of how data transmits from the hardware layer to like the physical layer to the network
allow us to
layer,
communicate across multiple devices all simultaneously
and then
send information
being
that might be very
received on the
different
other
from each
end
other.
with a
We refer to
handshake
this
and
as
stuff, so-
multiplexing. This allows us to send different types of traffic across the network simultaneously and have all of that information
Multiplexing.
properly received on the other side. Let's look with a little more detail into TCP, or the Transmission Control Protocol. This is a protocol that we refer to as connection-oriented. That means there is a formal process to set up a conversation with the device and a formal process to end that conversation. You can think of this as making a phone call. You would put it.
All right, TCP, juicy stuff. Well, at least very interesting. We use all these devices around us. We have no idea if you don't study this on how they actually work. So pretty interesting. Doobie-doobie-doo. Okay. If anyone's watching, would it be more interesting for me to kind of like have a doodling software on the screen where I actually scribble down the notes, some kind of drawing or tablet accessory to give you that info or visual feedback? Is that more entertaining if anyone's watching? I don't know if anyone is.
In a phone number, you would hear the phone ring on the other side. On the other side, the person might say hello, and you would say hello back to them, and then you can proceed with your conversation. At the end of that call, you would say, it was good talking to you, goodbye. The other person would say goodbye, and you hang up. This is
What I'm going to do to aid some learning here is I'm going to put questions in the table. So as the information's getting more dense and juicier, I'm going to add a table so that I can basically leave a little question for myself to test my knowledge and kind of build quizzes later on and improve retention. But I feel like that'd be a chore doing that manually. Is there a shortcut to add tables in Google Docs? Let's Google it. In Google Sheets, let's say. Oh, Sheets, Docs, yep. What am I saying? Add table. Oh wow, yeah, there is. See, efficiency. Hashtag efficiency. At table 2x2. Oh, that's cool. Below, whatever. Okay, let's get back to it.
This is very similar to the process with TCP, where there is a formal connection setup and a formal connection teardown. You'll sometimes see TCP referred to as reliable delivery. That means that we are able to know that the information that we've sent to another device really has been received. That's because TCP includes an acknowledgement process. So TCP sends the data, and the person receiving the data will send back an acknowledgement so that both sides of the conversation know that everything was received properly. If any of the information sent by the sender is damaged or corrupted in the transport process, the receiving station can send a message back to the sending device telling it that something did not work properly and they need to resend that data to be able to receive it properly. This also allows the sender and the receiver to manage how much data is being sent at any particular time. We refer to this as flow control, and that means the receiving device can tell the sender to speed up the data or slow down the data depending on how much information it's able to receive at any particular time. It's this constant sending of data and an acknowledgement of the data that provides that reliable delivery and enables all of those TCP-specific functions. But there are some protocols that don't need that very detailed level of reliability and the overhead that's associated with TCP. That's why we created UDP, or the User Datagram Protocol. We have a connection-oriented protocol with TCP, and with UDP, we are connection-less. There's no formal process to start the communications flow, and there's no formal teardown process to end the communication. We refer to that as an unreliable delivery. Those terms are referring to the fact that there's no way to know if the data really was received on the other side because there are no acknowledgements coming back to the sender. Since there's no acknowledgement being sent by the receiving device, we don't have any way to recover from any errors, and there's no way to perform any type of retransmission. And since the sending station has no idea if everything really was received properly on the other side, there's no way to set any type of flow control. The device that's receiving all of this data has no way to send back any type of messages saying that they should speed up or slow down the data transfer process. Given that explanation of UDP, you might be thinking, why would any application want to use UDP? One advantage of UDP is that there's very little overhead. You don't have to set up any formal communication. You can simply send data, and you have a best effort to get that data to the other side. A good example of an application that works exactly like this is one for real-time communication. Applications that are voice over IP related or send video across the network are all in real time. If information is lost along the way, we can't stop our conversation.
I'm getting ads for Restream when I'm using Restream, like, come on.
PenandMinecraft.com. I built it with the help of today's video sponsor, Bluehost.
Rewind what we were talking about and then replay that through the same connection. Once we lose that data, we've lost that moment in time, and there's no way to rewind time to go back to where we were. For that reason, voice over IP and any real-time communication would prefer to use UDP since it has the least amount of overhead and it doesn't have to worry about resending traffic that may have been lost. There are other protocols that work with UDP that perform a similar function where they need low overhead and aren't concerned if the data is going to get to the other side or not. If there's any problems in that communication, it will simply perform the process again from the application's perspective. A good example of these connectionless protocols would be DHCP, or the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, that we commonly use to automatically assign IP addresses on all of the devices on our networks. Another good example is TFTP, or the Trivial File Transfer Protocol, which often sends very small amounts of data across the network and doesn't require any particular overhead or retransmission capability. Fortunately, even though UDP doesn't provide any way to resend the data, the application can provide that same functionality. So instead of relying on UDP as the retransmission method, the application itself will keep track of everything that is sent back and forth, and the application will decide if it ever needs to resend any traffic across the network. This requires the application itself to be able to manage that process, and some applications like voice over IP apps might not do anything if data is lost. If information doesn't make it through, then it will simply continue sending the voice over IP traffic, and if the users didn't receive information, they'll simply ask someone to repeat what they just said. Some applications, though, are very particular about making sure that data is properly received on the other side. Applications such as HTTPS, which is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, commonly used for our web server communication, or something like SSH for Secure Shell, which is our terminal communication, is something that does use TCP and will resend data automatically using that TCP protocol. TCP is able to confirm that data was received by receiving acknowledgments from the receiving station, very much like you would do with a return receipt. This means the application doesn't have to worry if information was received or anything goes missing, because that entire process of maintaining the data flow is managed by TCP. As we mentioned earlier, this TCP or UDP data is being transported across the network using IP. As we mentioned earlier, very much like you would do with a return receipt. This means the application doesn't have to worry if information was received or anything goes missing, because that entire process of maintaining the data flow is managed by TCP. As we mentioned earlier, this TCP or UDP data is being transported across the network using IP, or the Internet Protocol. And again, IP is our truck, TCP and UDP are the boxes on the truck, and the network itself is the road that we drive on. If you're working with a mover to help move your house, then you know that the movers are going to load up your truck with all of those boxes, and they're going to move that truck from one location to another. So they need the address of where they're going to pick up this information, and they need the address of where they're going to take it. In the world of networking, we refer to these addresses as IP addresses, and every computer on your network has an IP address, just like every house on your block has a street address. When we send information to a web server, we are sending that information to a specific IP address. These boxes of TCP or UDP data will arrive at that they're going to take it. In the world of networking, they're going to move that truck from one location to another. So they need the address of where they're going to pick up this information, and they need the address of where they're going to take it.
I want to
In
see
the
my
world of
fine
networking, we refer to
drawing
these
skills.
addresses as IP addresses, and every computer on your network has an IP address, just like every house on your block has a street address. When we send information to a web server, we are sending that information to a specific IP
How do I
address.
use
These
this
boxes
pen?
of TCP
Oh,
or
go on.
UDP data will arrive at that IP address, but then we have to decide where that particular box is going to go. Just as your house has many different rooms, you have servers that are running many different services. Your web server might also be a DNS or domain name server. It could also be a file server, and it can provide voice over IP functions. When information is received
do I
by
add
that
the
server,
visual
it now needs to
information?
decide what room is going to receive this box so
This
that we
is
can
not
properly process
intuitive.
that data. The operating system
Okay,
is sitting
whatever.
outside of your house, and it's looking at all of the boxes that are coming in from the moving truck. Each box has the name of a room written on it, and it knows that that box should go to the bedroom. Another box perhaps goes to the living room. There might be a third box that goes to the kitchen. TCP and UDP work in a similar way, but instead of writing the name of the service or the room on the box that's being received, instead we're using something called a port number. So instead of having a room name, you instead have different services, and each service is assigned a particular number. These port numbers allow the incoming data to know exactly where that information should be sent so that it's processed properly by the appropriate application. This means when information is being sent from one device to another, there are usually at least three different types of information that are important. There is the IP address of the server, there is the TCP or UDP protocol that is being used, and then there is a port number, and from the server's perspective, it would be a port number associated with that application. The sending device also has an IP address. It's sending information via TCP or UDP, and there's a port number also used by the client, which is useful for sending information back to the client once the server has processed that data.
Showtime! Chef! It's hard, and it's brutal, and that's what makes it special.
I don't want you to hide from things just because you can.
Atera is the IT painkiller. Remote monitoring and management, remote access, help desk and ticketing. smart automations,
As you start looking at different services and memorizing different port numbers, you'll notice that certain applications always tend to use the same port numbers. We refer to these as non-ephemeral ports or permanent port numbers. Usually these port numbers are between port 0 and port 1023, but it could use any port number available to be able to define what port number is associated with an application. If you were to look at the configuration of a service that's running on a device, such as a web server, an email server, or a file server, you'll see that a port number is also associated with that particular service. This allows anyone who's communicating to that service to always send information with a port number that will be recognized by that service. To be able to communicate to that service, our client needs to have not only an IP address and TCP or UDP protocol, but it needs a client port number. Client port numbers can be any number, usually between 1024 and 65535. Protocol, but it needs a client port number. Client port numbers can be any number, usually between by that service. To be able to communicate to that service, our client needs to have not only an IP address and TCP or UDP protocol, but it needs a client port number. Client port numbers can be any number, usually between 1024 and 65535. Because these port numbers are simply used temporarily, we refer to them as ephemeral ports. They are used for a single communication, and once the communication to the server is over, we close that connection and we don't use that port number any longer. If we need to communicate to that server again, we choose a new random port number and use that as our client port number. So now we know that a TCP or UDP port number can be any value between 0 and 65535. If we're communicating to a server, that server is probably going to use a non-ephemeral port number, but that may not always be the case. Fortunately, most applications will use a port number, and it will always be that port number running on that service. Also keep in mind that these port numbers sound like they could be used for some type of security process, but in reality, they're simply a number that's used for reference. They're not designed to be a security mechanism, and it's very easy to find a port number on a service, even if someone may have changed the port number to something else. In fact, we often refer to these port numbers on a server as a well-known port number because you need to know the port number in order to communicate to that particular service. Also keep in mind that TCP port numbers have a range between 0 and 65535, and UDP port numbers also have a range between 0 and 65535. But a TCP port 80 is not the same thing as a UDP port 80. These are different protocols that have a similar numbering scheme for their port numbers, but the port numbers are unique to each individual protocol. Here's an example of a client and a server having multiple forms of communication occurring simultaneously across the network and using different port numbers in order to do that. In this example, we have a server, and on this server are 3 different services. There's a web server running at TCP port 80, there's a voice over IP server running at UDP port 5004, and there's an email server using TCP port 143. That means we'll have 3 different types of communication going between our client and our server. Notice that our client has an IP address of 10.0.0.1, and our server has an IP address of 10.0.0.2. You can see that we're sending information across an Ethernet network because we have an Ethernet header and an Ethernet trailer. Inside of each of these communications is IP, because IP is the protocol that we use the most for communication. But notice that inside of these IP packets, some of these have TCP traffic, others have UDP traffic. And you can see that the TCP traffic may be HTTP data using port 80, it might be voice over IP data using UDP port 5004, or email data using port 143. If we were to look at a protocol decode of this information, we get a lot more detail about the communication that's occurring. We know that we have a source IP of 10.0.0.1 and a destination IP of 10.0.0.2 that matches the IP address of the client and the IP address of the server. Each of these communication flows have the same source IP and destination IP. Notice that there are differences, though, inside of those IP packets. You can see in each of these examples that the destination port is the port that we listed above, or the well-known port for that particular application. But notice that the source port is using a random number, and each of these traffic flows is using a very different source port. That's because those are ephemeral ports. They're temporary ports that we're simply using to be able to send this information to the server and receive information back. If this client needed to send additional traffic flows to the server, then it would choose another random port number and send another flow of traffic that had some application data inside of it. This is the process that's occurring for every device on your network to be able to send traffic from one place to another. Whether that's on a local server or across the internet, the process is exactly the same, all thanks to IP, TCP, and UDP.
Interesting, very meaty module 2.1 done on TCP and ICP Internet Protocol addresses. Nice. Very nice.
Lucidchart makes intelligent diagramming easy and helps your best ideas become real. Start from scratch or get started with templates. Shape your ideas with hundreds of shape libraries, from technical systems to flowcharts and process maps and even org charts. Lucidchart integrates with your favorite software applications, so it works where you work. Share
As we've discussed in a previous video,
Right, let's go over common ports. This is still 2.1.
the port numbers used by TCP and UDP can be very important when trying to communicate to a service. So it's useful to know what those port numbers are if you're trying to troubleshoot any type of communications issue. We might also need to know these port numbers if we're performing some type of firewall configuration. Our firewalls often use TCP and UDP port numbers as one of the criteria that it uses to allow or to block network traffic. As you go through this video, you'll find there are a number of port numbers that you're required to know as part of your A+ studies. You'll find that memorizing these port numbers can sometimes feel a bit tedious, but after you start using these applications, configuring firewalls, and troubleshooting network communication, you'll find that most of these port numbers become second nature. For the purposes of your A+ studies, make sure that you understand not only the port number and the protocol associated with it, but that you understand why that particular protocol is important and how it's used on the network. The first port numbers we'll look at are port numbers TCP port 20 and TCP port 21. These two port numbers are commonly associated with FTP, or the File Transfer Protocol. FTP is a generic file transfer protocol that can be used by many different operating systems to transfer information from one device to another. And different types of FTP may use one or both of these protocols. TCP port 20 is often used as the active data transfer, and port 21 is often used as the administration or control port. The FTP protocol often requires you to have some type of authentication into the system, so it may ask for a username, a password, or some other type of authentication factor. FTP can also be configured with an anonymous or generic login so that anyone can log in regardless of what the username or password might be. FTP is also a full-featured protocol that not only can transfer a file, but can list the files available in a particular directory. We can add, delete, change the file name, and perform other administration functions as well. As part of our tasks as server administrators or network, so that anyone can log in, types of transfer, and the protocols are commonly associated with FTP, or the File Transfer Protocol. FTP is a generic file transfer protocol that can be used by many different operating systems to transfer information from one device to another. And different types of FTP may use one or both of these protocols. TCP port 20 is often used as the active data transfer, and port 21 is often used as the administration or control port. The FTP protocol often requires you to have some type of authentication into the system, so it may ask for a username, a password, or some other type of authentication factor. FTP can also be configured with an anonymous or generic login so that anyone can log in regardless of what the username or password might be. FTP is also a full-featured protocol that not only can transfer a file, but can list the files available in a particular directory. We can add, delete, change the file name, and perform other administration functions as well. As part of our tasks as server administrators or network administrators, we are often required to connect to a remote device and make configuration changes at the command line. To be able to do this securely across the network, we need to use a protocol that can encrypt all of this data as we're sending it from one side to the other. The most common protocol
Okay, so we learned about TCP there.
as well. As part of our tasks as server administrators or network administrators, we are often required to connect to a remote device and make configuration changes at the command line. To be able to do this securely across the network, we need to use a protocol that can encrypt all of this data as we're sending it from one side to the other. The most common protocol used for this function is SSH, or Secure Shell. It provides an encrypted communication link over TCP port 22. This is very similar to the old-style Telnet protocol, but Telnet is one that we commonly no longer see in use because it does not provide any type of encryption. If you're communicating at the command line to a server, you should always be using SSH, and you'll find that it almost always is using TCP port 22. However, you may find that there's a system in your network that is very old, that does not support SSH, and the only way to administer that device at the command line is using the older Telnet protocol. Telnet stands for Telecommunications Network, and it commonly communicates over TCP port 23. Visually and functionally, this works identical to SSH. You have a command line, you can log into a device with your username and password, you can administer that device remotely, but the major difference is that all of the communication used for Telnet is in the clear. There's no encryption used for Telnet, and that's why most organizations will prevent anyone from using the Telnet protocol and instead recommend that you use SSH to perform this communication. Email continues to be one of the most popular forms of communication across our networks, and to be able to facilitate that communication, we need some type of protocol that can send mail from one server to another. That protocol is the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, or SMTP. SMTP commonly uses TCP port 25 to be able to send these email messages from one email server to another. You may also find that some devices are configured to send information to the email server initially, also using this SMTP protocol. So not only are you configuring this on your mail server, you may also find that you're configuring SMTP with the appropriate port number on your local device. To be able to receive email messages, we would commonly use protocols such as IMAP or POP3, and we'll talk about those protocols and their associated port numbers later in this video. In these videos so far, we've talked a lot about devices able to communicate with those protocols and their associated port numbers later in this video. In these videos so far, we've talked a lot about the device. To be able to receive email messages, we would commonly use protocols such as IMAP or POP3, and we'll talk about those protocols and their associated port numbers later in this video. In these videos so far, we've talked a lot about devices able to communicate with each other using IP, or Internet Protocol. The Internet Protocol address is one very similar to what you would communicate with each other port numbers later in this. Commonly use protocols such as IMAP or POP3, and we'll talk about those protocols and their associated port numbers later in this video. In these videos so far, we've talked a lot about devices able to communicate with each other using IP, or Internet Protocol. The Internet Protocol address is one very similar to what you would see here, 162.159.246.164. But when we're typing things into our browser, we're not typing in a bunch of numbers, we're typing in the name of a website such as www.professormesser.com. In order to translate this fully qualified domain name into a usable IP address for network communication, we need to perform a translation using the domain name system, or DNS. DNS commonly uses UDP port 53. As you can imagine, DNS is a very popular and important service because we almost never memorize IP addresses to be able to communicate with these devices, but it's very common to remember the fully qualified domain name. For that reason, it's very common to have multiple DNS servers for redundancy so that we are always able to resolve the fully qualified domain name to the appropriate IP address. The computer on your network was probably not manually configured with a set of IP addresses, subnet masks, default gateways, or DNS servers. This was done automatically when you turned your computer on using the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, or DHCP. DHCP happens automatically behind the scenes, and it makes the entire process of configuring your system with these addresses completely seamless. DHCP commonly uses UDP port 67 and UDP port 68. On your network is a DHCP service that may be on a standalone server or appliance, or may be integrated into a small office home office wireless router that you might have at home. On this server is a pool of available IP addresses, and when a device connects to the network, it requests an IP address and configuration parameters from that pool. When a device starts up, it receives that IP address and it leases that IP address for a certain amount of time. When that lease is up, it can choose to renew the lease or give the IP address back and put it into the pool for someone else to use. System administrators can also use DHCP to manually configure IP addresses that will always be assigned to particular devices. So if you have a printer or server that you would like to always have the same IP address, you can reserve that IP address in your DHCP server, and it will be automatically assigned with the same IP address every time that printer or server starts up. You're probably watching this video in a browser, and to be able to perform that functionality, you're probably using HTTP or HTTPS. This is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. The standard form of HTTP sends all of the HTTP data over a non-encrypted or in-the-clear communication, and it often uses TCP port 80. If you see the traffic using TCP port 443, it's probably using the secure version of HTTP, which means that all of that web communication inside of that packet will be encrypted. A large percentage of the devices you communicate to in your browser are probably going to use HTTPS these days, but you'll still find a number of web services that are not using the encrypted version and instead are sending all of their traffic via TCP port 80 and the HTTP protocol. If you're using an email client on your computer or your mobile device, you may be receiving emails using a number of different protocols. Two of the more popular protocols are POP3 and IMAP. POP3 is the Post Office Protocol, version 3, and it commonly uses TCP port 110 to be able to transfer data down to your computer. A newer and somewhat more functional protocol transfer data down to your computer. It commonly uses TCP port 1, version 3, and its protocols are POP3 and IMAP. POP3 is the Post Office Protocol, version 3, and it commonly uses TCP port 110 to be able to transfer data down to your computer. A newer and somewhat more functional protocol for receiving email is IMAP4, or the Internet Message Access Protocol, version 4. IMAP commonly uses TCP port 143. IMAP provides a number of additional features not available in POP3, such as the management of the inbox from multiple clients. You're able to make folders and transfer emails into those folders, and all of those updates will be synchronized across all of your different systems. And all of those updates will be synchronized across all of your different email clients. If you're using Microsoft Windows, there's a process for transferring data within Windows that uses a protocol named Server Message Block, or SMB. You may also see this referred to as the Common Internet File System, or CIFS. Not only is this used for file transfers, it's used to send information to printer queues and for other processes where Windows needs to communicate information between different Windows devices. Older Windows devices use an additional protocol inside of TCP/IP called NetBIOS. This NetBIOS protocol used two primary port numbers to be able to communicate. UDP port 137 used a NetBIOS name service, which is very similar to the DNS name service that we talked about earlier, and to be able to set up sessions to transfer files, it uses TCP port 139. On most modern versions of Windows, you'll find direct connectivity between IP addresses that don't use the NetBIOS protocol. We refer to that as direct communication or NetBIOS-less communication, and it often uses TCP port 445. Most organizations will have a central database that contains all of the important information, and it often uses TCP port 445. Most organizations, to transfer files, it uses TCP port 139. On most modern versions of Windows, you'll find direct connectivity between IP addresses that don't use the NetBIOS protocol. We refer to that as direct communication or NetBIOS-less communication, and it often uses TCP port 445. Most organizations will have a central database that contains all of the important information about the devices, users, and important resources available on their network. This is usually a directory of services or a database that contains all of this information, and to be able to access this database, we use a standard set of protocols. One of these protocols is LDAP, or LDAP-S. This stands for the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol Secure. LDAP commonly uses TCP port 389. This directory is usually separated into different categories, such as an organization, an organizational unit, or a common name. For example, at Messer Studios, we might have a production organizational unit, a support organizational unit, and an engineering organizational unit. And of course, within those, there may be individuals using a common name, such as Sam or Daniel, and we might also have a database called TechDocs. Using LDAP, we can refer to this database to find where these components might be, and in some cases, even provide additional details, such as authentication for any individual users. A very common use of LDAP is Microsoft's Active Directory infrastructure, where that database is able to be referenced using the LDAP protocol. If you are troubleshooting technology, then you're probably very familiar with remote control access of a separate machine. These days we have users around the world, and it's not very practical for you to visit every single one of those users directly to be able to solve problems on their computer. In those cases, we'll probably use some type of remote access protocol such as RDP, or Remote Desktop Protocol. This allows you to view and share the desktop on a remote device using TCP port 3389. This is primarily used to access Windows devices and to be able to control those Windows devices across the network. You can usually do this from a Windows device itself or from many other operating systems as well. You can use RDP to control an entire computer or to simply run a single application on that remote computer. And although RDP is commonly associated with connecting to Windows devices, there are also many RDP clients that would allow you to connect to that Windows computer from macOS, Linux, Unix, iPhone, and other operating systems as well.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there for today's study session. Got to get to the gym and not merge my spine into this chair. So I'm going to get up, move around, get to the gym. Maybe I'll pop in for another session, or maybe it'll be tomorrow, but there definitely will be another one. Oh, dumb ad. Okay. Thank you, Unfair Rabbit, and I'll see you guys in the next stream.